Hey homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. Today in the kitchen we are making Kasundi, and this is a Indian tomato and roasted red pepper relish that I ran across when I was looking for something completely different on the Ball website. So I'm not sure if this is in any of their books or not, but I ran across it last year and printed it out and stuck it in the cover of one of my Ball books. We're kind of hip deep in canning season right now, and I was paging through the Ball book and found this recipe and thought, oh, right, I wanted to make that. Kasundi is a Indian tomato relish that would typically be used as a side or a condiment. However, I have a recipe for an Instant Pot Indian dish that I'll put a link to down below and show you a little bit of the video here. And it's ground meat. I usually use lamb, but you can use any kind of ground beef, ground chicken, or ground turkey. And then it typically has some tomatoes and then a whole bunch of Indian spices. And what's in this jar but tomatoes and a whole bunch of Indian spices. And so it's a really nice, just quick and easy base for that recipe, which is how I primarily plan on using it. I find that I'm not a big relish eater. I don't do a lot of relish on the side kind of condiment. Maybe it's a Midwest thing, I don't know. But it's never been something I grew up with, and I've gone through many phases of canning where I've seen those kind of recipes and thought, oh, right, I should totally do that. And then I make it, and then we never eat it. And 3 or 4 years later, I end up feeding it to the chickens because it's just not the kind of stuff that is in our normal rotation. However, I think this is going to be a fantastic base for Indian dishes, such as the one that I mentioned. So this has homegrown garlic, a lot of ginger, and then it calls for either black mustard or brown mustard. I used brown mustard because I don't have access to black mustard locally. So black mustard seed and cumin, and then a lot of black pepper and a little bit of turmeric. So classic Indian spices, really delicious, and a great way to use up the abundance of tomatoes that I have right now. I have a lot of regular canned tomatoes still on my shelf from the previous year, and so I'm looking for interesting new ways of using up the tomato harvest this year. So Kasundi, let's get started. So I'm using just regular heirloom tomatoes in this recipe. You could also choose to use pastel tomatoes. This is a sweet pepper called Carmen, and I am roasting that under the broiler of my toaster oven. Here I have cut up and pitted out all of the tomatoes and put them into chunks. For the peppers, after they're roasted, you want to basically cover them and let them steam, and that allows you to pull off most of those skins. And then the tomatoes, they get chopped up, and then a bunch of salt gets added, and you let it sit for a while, and so that's going to pull out all kinds of moisture. So here's our roasted peppers that have cooled at this point, and I'm doing my best to get the skin off. I'm not going to be precious about this. Some of it is still going to stay on there, and I'm just going to leave it. I'm not going to worry about it, but I'm getting the worst of the skin off. The parts that have roasted, it should peel right off really easily, and then obviously taking out the cores and the seeds. The other thing you can do if you've got a lot of peppers on hand is roast them like this, peel them, and then just throw them in freezer bags. And then when you have a recipe that calls for roasted red peppers, you've got them in your freezer without having to go about canning them. Canning them is kind of fiddly, and they get super soft because they have to cook for a really long time. So I like to freeze them if I'm going to use them for stuff. But this Carmen, if you've followed any of my other videos, you know how much I love this particular sweet pepper. It's really fantastic. That one larger round pepper in there is a pimento pepper. And then for our spice mix, we've got brown mustard, turmeric, having clumping issues with my turmeric, a lot of cumin seed, and then a couple teaspoons of fresh ground black pepper. And then I'm going to toast that usually for a minute or two, basically until I start to smell it. And this is going to release all of the natural oils that are in there and really brighten everything up and make it just pop once it goes into the recipe. And then here is our garlic, our ginger, and then a hot chili pepper. I believe this was just a jalapeno that I used. And I think there's one Sugar Rush peach in there as well. I'm going to put all of that along with our toasted spice mix into my food processor and grind that up so that I get a nice paste. And they do say that if it's clumping up and you can't get it to grind well, you can add a tablespoon of vinegar to that. But I didn't have any problem. They seem to grind up pretty well. Here's our finished paste. It's not going to break up the seeds that are in there, but that's fine. Got some brown sugar here. I believe this was apple cider vinegar. I'm going to bring that to a low simmer just to melt all of the sugar that's in there. I need a chopped onion. That's an onion from the garden this year. Always fun. And then here's our salted and soaked chopped tomatoes, and I'm going to put those in a colander and drain them out. And you don't use the liquid. The liquid gets tossed. And I tried just sipping it just to see if I could just use it kind of like tomato juice. It is way too salty. So in goes our paste into our sugar vinegar mixture. I'm going to bring that up to a boil. And then all of our chopped roasted red peppers. Aren't those gorgeous? And then our onion. Give that a nice stir. And then once that comes back up to a boil, in go all of our tomatoes. It's interesting that this recipe does not have you peel the tomatoes, so the peel gets left on, which is unusual for any kind of a canned tomato recipe. I think Ball is maybe starting to actually research that a little bit more because it saves a ton of time if you don't have to take the skins off. Bringing everything up to a slow simmer, and then it just basically says cook it down until it's thick. So not a whole lot of guidance, but here it is after the cook down. You can see it's reduced in volume quite a bit. And I've got a nice thick relish. Called for pints. I'm going to put this in half pints, which are 8-ounce containers, just because I don't think I will use a pint up at a time. And I hate having, partial jars of that kind of stuff in my fridge. My fridge is about 50% condiments right now as it is. So I chose to primarily put these in half pints. I did have 1 pint here, and then I realized that I was supposed to get 4 pints, which meant 8 half pints, and then the reality was I ended up getting about 6.5. So I probably cooked it down slightly further than what the recipe called for, but it seemed to be a nice consistency, and it didn't really give any super specific directions, and so I wasn't particularly worried that this was too thick. So I've got everything filled up. I'm going through here and just topping everything off to a 1/2 inch headspace, and then wiping my rims. And you want to be sure to wipe your rims well because you've got a lot of sugar in this, so it's a little sticky. And that pint that's off to the side there, I just threw that in the fridge and ended up using it in that Indian recipe that I was talking about earlier so that I could try that out. And it was great. We both really loved it. So new lids and reused rings. And I've had a couple people comment on other videos recently about lids. You no longer have to boil your lids in order to sanitize them before you put them on your jars, as long as you've got more than a 10-minute processing time. It sanitizes and sterilizes it in the boiling water canner. So everything's in the pot. I'm going to wait for that to come up to a full rolling boil and then start my timer. And then once my timer is done, I like to take the lid off and just let it sit in the canner for about 5 minutes to cool off a little bit. It helps reduce siphoning and you get a better seal on your jar. So let everything sit in that hot water. And then out it comes. And here we are right after coming out of the canner. I love that you can see those little flecks of mustard seed and cumin seed in there. And then here it is the next morning after I've taken the rings off. I store almost all of my canned goods with the rings off so that if the seal fails, I know it. You can see how nice and thick this is. There you go, Kasundi. Definitely going to be a great meal starter for all kinds of Indian dishes, even if that is very untraditional. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.